West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We begin tonight with the most important story of the night, which is now the complete collapse of judicial ethics at the United States Supreme Court in the person of the most publicly corrupted Supreme Court justice in history, Justice Clarence Thomas. A Supreme Court justice violated the law in plain sight today. And the degradation of the Supreme Court in the Trump era is so complete and has so fully infected most of the news media that what Clarence Thomas did today is mostly being reported as just another day at the Supreme Court. Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe, who himself is one of the most accomplished Supreme Court practitioners in history, stated the case against Clarence Thomas plainly today, saying Justice Thomas violated 28 U.S.C. 455, requiring any justice to recuse when his or her impartiality might reasonably be questioned, or his or her spouse is known by the justice to have an interest that could be substantially affected by the outcome. Because the only federal judges who are not covered by the Judicial Code of Ethics are the 9 members of the United States Supreme Court, it is commonly assumed that it is completely up to a Supreme Court justice whether to recuse from a case. But there is a federal law, as Professor Tribe pointed out, that does require the recusal of a Supreme Court justice when a spouse is known to have an interest in the outcome of a case. We all know that Clarence Thomas's spouse has an interest in the outcome of the criminal investigation of Donald Trump in Georgia by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Many Trump associates have fought subpoenas issued by the Fulton County grand jury, and they have lost those fights and been forced to testify to that grand jury, including Trump's election lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who has already testified to that grand jury. Senator Lindsey Graham is fighting his subpoena to that grand jury, and he has lost his argument in the first 2 stages of the federal case that he brought to try to block that subpoena. A federal district court ruled against Lindsey Graham, and then a 3-judge panel of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously ruled against Lindsey Graham, and 2 of those 3 judges unanimously ruling against Lindsey Graham were Trump appointees to the appeals court. And then on Friday, Lindsey Graham filed an emergency appeal to the United States Supreme Court, knowing that the Supreme Court justice assigned to handle emergency appeals from the 11th Circuit is Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas should have immediately recused himself from that case, but he did not. And instead, today, Clarence Thomas became the first federal judge in this case to rule in favor of Senator Lindsey Graham, knowing that Senator Lindsey Graham's testimony to the grand jury could include possible questions about Clarence Thomas's wife. It would be reasonable to ask Lindsey Graham who he communicated with about the results of the 2020 presidential election. In court filings, Fani Willis has made it clear she wants to ask Lindsey Graham about his phone calls to Georgia's Secretary of State, asking him about the presidential election in Georgia. It is reasonable to ask Lindsey Graham whether he spoke to Donald Trump before or after Donald Trump's call to Georgia's Secretary of State, the phone call heard around the world.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
One of the people who was listening in on the Trump side of that phone call was a Washington lawyer named Cleta Mitchell. Cleta Mitchell is one of the people who Clarence Thomas's wife mentioned to Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in her repeated texts to Mark Meadows about trying to overturn the results of the presidential election. Cleta Mitchell is a witness and a potential witness in the Georgia investigation that Lindsey Graham has now brought to the Supreme Court. A Supreme Court justice's wife was throwing around that name, Cleta Mitchell, in her texts to the White House Chief of Staff, and that Supreme Court justice doesn't think that that gives his wife an interest, a legal interest, in the case that the Supreme Court justice decided to rule on today. Clarence Thomas granted Lindsey Graham's request to block his testimony, temporarily at least, block his testimony to the grand jury until his full appeal can be heard by the Supreme Court. And it gets worse. The lawyer who filed Lindsey Graham's appeal to the Supreme Court put two of the justices currently serving on the court in their current jobs. Lindsey Graham's lawyer representing him now at the Supreme Court is the first Trump White House counsel, Don McGahn, who ran the process that chose Donald Trump's first two Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Those two Supreme Court justices owe Don McGahn their jobs. They should be recusing themselves from this case, too. Now, most judges can overcome these apparent conflicts of interest in the application of law, and that might happen in this case. The Supreme Court might ultimately rule against Lindsey Graham. Clarence Thomas might ultimately rule against Lindsey Graham. But that doesn't change the fact that Clarence Thomas has violated a perfectly reasonable law by participating in this case, a case in which his spouse, quote, is known by the justice to have an interest that could be substantially affected by the outcome. By not recusing in this case, no matter how the case turns out, Clarence Thomas has disgraced himself and the United States Supreme Court once again. Remember, the issue of recusal is not about the judge's actual and real inability to be fair. The issue of recusal turns on our perception, a reasonable person's perception of a judge's potential conflict of interest. And this is full of that for three justices of the current Supreme Court, all of whom should be recused in this case, and none of whom will recuse in this case, not on the Trump Supreme Court. In the other criminal investigation targeting Donald Trump, the New York Times is reporting tonight that prosecutors are focusing on two witnesses, one of whom who was seen on video actually moving boxes of documents at Donald Trump's Florida residence himself. The Times reports security camera footage obtained by investigators showed Walt Nauta moving boxes out of a storage area at Mar-a-Lago, raising the questions about whether they were moved at Mr. Trump's behest to conceal them from the authorities or Mr. Trump's own lawyers, who were dealing with demands that he return the documents. Prosecutors have indicated they are skeptical of an initial account Mr. Nauta gave investigators about moving documents stored at Mar-a-Lago. and are using the specter of charges against him for misleading investigators to persuade him to sit again for questioning, according to two people briefed on the matter. The other witness under pressure from federal investigators is Kash Patel, who was officially designated by Donald Trump just this year as one of his official representatives in dealing with presidential records. The Times reports, quote, Mr. Patel refused to answer many questions this month before a grand jury in Washington hearing evidence about Mr. Trump's handling of the documents, citing his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, according to a person briefed on the matter. The Washington Post has reported more about the contents of the documents in the investigation. At least one of the documents seized by the FBI describes Iran's missile program, according to these people who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe an ongoing investigation. Other documents described highly sensitive intelligence work aimed at China, they said. Unauthorized disclosures of specific information in the documents would pose multiple risks, experts say. People aiding U.S. intelligence efforts could be endangered and collection methods could be compromised.
It is Tuesday, the 25th of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Did you know that a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world? It always has. And it always will. Well. It looks like Clarence Thomas has stepped in it. And will John Roberts do anything about it? I don't think so. When you're part of the umpire crew, I think they just band together. You would think that they would be huddling and maybe, figuring out if it was a foul ball. But it's pretty weird when you find out that one of the umpires on your crew is actually playing the game. Because do you really think Clarence Thomas doesn't have any motivation to overturn the United States of America into something, I don't know. Not America, let's put it that way. I don't know what to call it, but it's not America. Yeah, we're supposed to like everybody. Oh, come on in, have some food, have a drink. Yeah, let's kick your feet up. Let's watch something on the big screen. Come on. Into now we're I don't know. Am I on the list, on the hit list when the neighbors decide that it's their time to take over? Okay. Well, that ain't America. Nope. That's not a welcome wagon. Remember those? Do they still have them? They should. Yeah. Get those red hat ladies out there welcoming people into town. Hi, how are you? Here's a welcome basket. You think, it's got a little bit of soup, some breads, a few pastries, soap. Everybody needs soap. Dishwashing liquid, too. You always need dishwashing liquid when you first move in. Who has that available? It's all packed away. Until you learn how to pack and you realize, wow, one of the first things we need to unpack is the dishwashing liquid. Okay, that's how you do it. But the welcome wagon was, sort of like a way of welcoming people into the neighborhood. Now no one wants anybody in the neighborhood. You're moving in. Why did you come here? Why are you here? Why are you disrupting our peaceful enclave of I don't know who, what, why, where, or how? We are all blind to whatever's happening until it happens to us. And it's always happening to us, and so that's why we want to know why you are here. Yeah, I got one of those interviews when we first moved in. Did we move? No, Mom wanted to be here, so, what are you going to do? Anyway, did I mention that the interviewer also had a gun strapped to his waist? And he came into my house. I'd let him in, I guess. You know what they say, the guy with a gun determines what polite conversation is, so you better be damn polite. Oh, yeah. Even if you're packing. Yeah, I didn't let him know necessarily offhand how close at hand the Katanji swords are. And I can whip those out pretty quick. when need be. They're just for slapping, not for slashing. Don't worry. Okay. Anyway, Clarence Thomas stepped in it, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And Ginny. Okay. Wow. Talk about history, huh? If they get to write it, you never know. Sometimes I wonder also, as an aside, why leaders of a certain position will do the things they do as if they know something like the end of the world is near, and so you might as well be as totally corrupt, libertine, and I don't know, as you can be, greedy. I always wanted to be greedy. Now's my chance. Well, the world is ending, so I might as well get my kicks in. And all the people want to get their kicks in were all the squares that told you, no, you're just like pie in the sky. You just think everything's going to be sweet and nice and candy to everybody. I didn't think like that, but I also like the idea of equal protection and, due process for all. I don't know. Even in the Pledge of Allegiance, it was, for all. Not just for you and me, but for everybody. And then you try to explain that anybody on U.S. soil, or within the auspices of the U.S. Law, has all the protections afforded for that law. And you try to explain that to MAGAs. They go, no way. We don't even want Democrats to have equal protection and due process. We want them in labor camps. Wow. And they say that too. I mean, listen to them. And, labor camps if we're lucky. So, and what are we doing? I don't know. Trying to get along. Let's have diplomacy. Let's have diplomacy with the murderous genocidal dictator, okay? Think I'm talking about Putin? Well, yeah, maybe, but he's got some friends. Let's negotiate with the terrorists, okay? Oh, man. The only diplomacy I want with Putin, since we're on that subject briefly, is his unconditional surrender, and we'll figure out what those terms are, and, when he puts his name to the dotted line, before he goes to the bunker, that's the only diplomacy I think that should be afforded to that fellow. And when it comes to reaching across the aisle at this point, how many times do we have to have our hands slapped and our back stabbed and, I don't know, even our front stabbed, gouging out our eyes? Oh, well, they were just having a moment. They'll be better later. Will they? It's not my experience. I don't know. You gotta sometimes just accept people for what they are, and some people are really bad. Do you want to hang around them? Do you think you can save them? No. At some point, you just have to let them save themselves, because I got to tell you, they won't. And you won't either, no matter how hard you try. And everybody will suffer except for the person you want to save. Okay, ultimately they're suffering because ultimately some terrible calamity will befall them. Befall? And, people will say, boy, that guy was on a trek towards the end, wasn't he? Or she, since it's for all. Anyway, we don't have to hang around bad people. We don't have to try to convince them anymore. It's not going to work. So, I appreciate the Progressive Caucus, putting their anti-war creds out on the line. I'm anti-war too. But I will not have somebody slap me across the face with a tactical nuclear weapon. What am I going to do? Turn the other cheek? I think that maybe we shall prevent them from even letting their slapping hand get higher than their waist. I don't know. That's one way to do it. You wait until it's above their sternum. Got to be good when it's there. I'm telling you. All right. Even Martin Luther King said, if the tanks are going to roll over you, what are you going to do? Stop them nonviolently? Well, some people might do that and get ground up in the treads for the cause. But this is about survival. And that survival doesn't mean giving in. And survival sometimes means that you got to push back. You can also get out of the way and then push so they topple over. That might work too. But walking away, pretending it's not going to happen to you, you can only put it off for another day until there are no more days left. And that might be in front of the rock pile. Because I got to tell you, even the appeasers end up at the rock pile eventually. Mark my word. Because it is written. In the history books, in fact. Okay. Enough of that metaphysical, historical deconstructionism. Shall we now attend to what we have curated for you today here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin this fabulous West Coast Cookbook and Tuesday, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The American Rescue Plan helped 200,000 child care providers stay open. Might as well let people know about it. And let people know also that we're doing it because we care. It's okay to say that too. And Joe does. I'm just saying. The Federal Trade Commission is taking the rare step of bringing individual sanctions against the CEO of alcohol delivery company Drizly for data privacy abuses. You would think data privacy abuses would be happening at a brand called Drizly. And the sheriff in metropolitan Phoenix has stepped up security around ballot drop boxes after armed Trump supporters intimidated voters. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Japan has stepped up its push to get the public to buy into digital IDs. And hundreds of Syrian men and boys were detained, beaten, and forcibly returned to their country by Turkish authorities over a 6-month period. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page, and do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really helps us pay our bills. If you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, yeah, that really does help. And the bills keep increasing, and that's the way of the world. And if you, I don't know, pay Caesar, you might live long enough to resist this violent, dark forces taking over representative democracy here in the United States of America and around the world. Yes, anyway, it's not hyperbole, but I will tell you that it is a quite serious situation, and we take it seriously, and we thank you for being generous to us so that we can pay those bills and continue being a bulwark against all those said dark forces. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime. And that's where the real reportage is. So check it out. And you can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. Pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Oh, I failed to give an update on my dad. Wow. Well, you don't get to be 93 going on 94 when, without being a survivor, as they say. And he has come out of this heart attack, and he also banged his head. But anyway, he's come out quite well. The stent must have opened up enough blood flow for him because he goes, I had a heart attack. I feel so much better. Well, yeah, Dad, you got a stent. Jeez. Anyway, I'm gonna tell him, you can't walk a marathon, okay? No walking marathons. He could have been a professional walker. He had a natural gait as one of those, competitive walkers. Move those hips back and forth. Heel and toe. That's how it goes. I always sort of like being a little bit more flat-footed at times and then spring up on the balls of your feet from there. But that's running, isn't it? Sometimes it's just always up on the balls of your toes. Anyway, he is doing so much better, and thanks to those who reached out and expressed good wishes. And, I guess they work. Okay? I guess. Causation and, that whole deal. We'll see. Anyway, he didn't live a, shall we say, libertine life. And that might be a testament to his longevity. Let's just put it that way. Okay, Dad. He's on the mend. Okay, let us then get into what we have in store for you. Did I bring it up? No, I didn't. So let us do that now. And this first offering is out of the American Independent. And as it loads here, I should have had it already loaded, and I apologize. It is by the great Oliver Willis. Great. Funds from the American Rescue Plan allowed 200,000 child care providers to continue operating during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to a Department of Health and Human Services study released on October 21. The funds may have helped maintain child care for as many as 9.5 million American children, according to the study. The spending package sent an average of $110,000 to the 200,000 child care providers, representing more than 8 out of 10 licensed child care providers across the country, according to the study. Providers use the money to pay their employees and for other operating costs. You give the money to an oil company, and what do? They pocket it, invest it, and then reap the profits from that, and then whine that you want them to maybe pay some of it back. The funds were sent to 98% of the U.S. counties with a persistent rate of poverty and included 30,000 facilities in rural areas. The pandemic severely impacted child care providers. An April 2020 study from the Center for American Progress estimated that the pandemic could lead to the permanent loss of child care for more than 4.4 million children. President Joe Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan in March of 2021 as part of his administration's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The legislation passed the House of Representatives and the Senate with only Democratic votes, and let that be a lesson to you. Okay? All of you out there, if you happen to be independent, wondering if, I don't know, should I vote for the Democratic package or not? Yeah, do. The Biden administration's plan included roughly $24 billion in child care stabilization grants designed to help providers continue operating. The plan also included $15 billion for a temporary expansion of child development block grants. The total, $39 billion in public spending, was the largest single allocation of tax dollars for child care in U.S. history. And I don't know. I suppose if people would know about it, and why is that? Is that because the Biden administration, as all Democratic administrations, have a messaging problem? Well, a messaging problem just means the media will not report the message. I wish they would. The White House touted the results of the HHS study, noting that child care programs have struggled with their funding since before the pandemic, while the cost of child care has been rising for years. A March 9 analysis by the nonprofit progressive think tank, the Century Foundation, found that more than 3 million child care slots had been maintained through the rescue plan funds. The foundation noted that the funds helped keep in place more than 70% of child care slots that had been projected to be lost. And the report said that the federal funds kept the industry from collapse. Zach Krusky of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Federal Trade Commission plans to take the rare step of bringing individual sanctions against the CEO of alcohol delivery company Drizly for data privacy abuses following allegations that the company's security failures under his watch exposed the personal information of about 2.5 million customers. The proposed order will follow Drizly CEO James Corey Rellis to future businesses, requiring him to implement a security program at any companies he runs that collects information from more than 25,000 people. The order will also apply to the company itself, which is now a subsidiary of the ride-hailing service Uber. Under the terms of the FTC action, Rellis and Drizly will have to destroy unnecessary data, implement new data controls, and train employees about cybersecurity. In singling out Rellis, the FTC signaled it could use a wider range of tools to address data privacy abuses under the leadership of Chair Lina Khan, who was widely expected to bring tougher oversight of the tech industry. The inclusion of Rellis allows a push from Democrats to more aggressively penalize individual executives involved in major data privacy breaches. Democrats on the commission previously criticized the agency's record-setting settlement with Facebook over the Cambridge Analytica data scandal because it did not name Facebook chief executive Mark Zuckerberg. Jonathan J. Cooper of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The sheriff in metropolitan Phoenix said he stepped up security around ballot drop boxes after a series of incidents involving people keeping watch on the boxes and taking video of voters after they were apparently inspired by lies about the 2020 election. On Friday, deputies responded when two masked people carrying guns and wearing bulletproof vests showed up at a drop box in Mesa, a Phoenix suburb. The Secretary of State said her office has received 6 cases of potential voter intimidation to the state attorney general and the U.S. Department of Justice, as well as threatening emails sent to the state elections director. People watching the boxes and voters showing up to vote have covered their license plates, according to photos shared on social media, fueled by former President Donald Trump's false claims of fraud in 2020 and the debunked film 2000 Mules. Drop boxes have become a hotbed for conspiracy theories alleging without evidence that people illegally collected and deposited ballots in them. Now, election security experts and Trump's own national security and Justice Department officials said there was no fraud to alter the outcome of the 2020 election. Dozens of lawsuits filed after the election were rejected, many by Trump-appointed judges. When they say dozens, they mean 64. Arizona, the state with the smallest margin of victory for President Joe Biden 2 years ago, now has some of the highest profile midterm races in the country, including a Senate race that could tip the balance of power in Congress. Uninformed vigilantes outside Maricopa's county drop boxes are not increasing election integrity, Stephen Richter of the Maricopa County Recorder said, and Bill Gates, chairman of the County Board of Supervisors, not that Bill Gates, said in a joint statement over the weekend, instead, they are leading to voter intimidation complaints. Richter and Gates are both Republicans. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your Fast Track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we're going to discuss the new alphabet soup of variants and subvariants likely to be around this winter.
And we'll talk about ways that boosters add protection, even if you've already had COVID. We're heading into another pandemic winter. Although no completely new variant of the COVID virus has emerged yet, there are several new Omicron subvariants. And you call them Halloween scariants, Tanya. What do we know about them so far?
That's right. Well, the Omicron variant first appeared last fall, and for the last year, COVID cases have mostly been driven by different versions of Omicron. First, there was B1.1.529, then there was BA1, BA2, and BA3, then BA4 and BA5. Now there are some new kids on the block. There's BA4.6, which descended from BA4 and makes up about 12% of COVID cases in the US. And there's BQ1 and BQ1.1, which together make up more than 11% of cases, according to the CDC's variant tracker. And these proportions are steadily growing. Meanwhile, in Singapore, a subvariant called XBB has been driving a surge in cases, and may be the most immune-evasive variant we've seen yet.
So at least 4 newbies. How worried should we be?
Anthony Fauci, Biden's chief medical advisor, called them troublesome. Like other variants before them, they are fast-growing, and at least in the case of BQ 1.1, it appears to be better at evading our immunity from prior infection or vaccination, although the vaccines should still offer some protection. Another concern involves monoclonal antibody treatments, like we talked about last show. One that is given prophylactically to immunocompromised people, known as Evusheld, is not effective against the BA 4.6 variant. And another antibody drug called bebtelovimab, which the US has already ordered 60,000 doses of, is not effective against BQ1, the FDA said.
That sounds like bad news for folks whose immune systems can't generate a strong response to vaccines.
That's right. Biden administration officials are in talks to develop alternatives, but it's not clear whether those will arrive in time for a winter surge.
Do experts think that we're headed for another surge? And if we are, what role will these new variants play?
COVID cases are already ticking up again in Europe, which is usually a few weeks ahead of the US. So I'd say chances are pretty good we'll be seeing another surge. But this was happening even before the new variants arrived on the scene, so some people think the variants will just accelerate things.
So how can people protect themselves?
The best thing you can do is get your booster shot. The new bivalent booster protects you against both the original SARS-CoV-2 strain and Omicron's BA4 and BA5 subvariants, and it's likely to provide some protection against the newer variants too. Yet as of a couple of weeks ago, only about 5% of eligible people in the US had gotten their booster shot.
That leaves a lot of unprotected people.
It does. And many young children haven't even gotten vaccinated at all. But there's still time to get one before the holidays. Or turkey might not be the only thing being passed around the dinner table. We were just talking about how few people are getting new booster shots. There are lots of possible reasons. Many people just aren't that worried about COVID anymore, and more have gotten it already and recovered. Some may think they now have natural immunity against new infections. Do they?
Sort of. I mean, yes, natural immunity is a real thing. But research shows that it's not as strong as what scientists now call hybrid immunity, which is an older infection plus a new booster.
Meaning people who got infected in the past and got a vaccine have better protection?
Yep. Some of the best data on this comes from a big study done in Qatar and published this summer in the New England Journal of Medicine. It tracked about 150,000 people. Qatar has a very strong system of national health records. So researchers were able to tell who got infected or reinfected with Omicron and when. And they had records of who got vaccinated with the Pfizer or Moderna shots or who didn't get vaccinated at all.
Did they find any important differences?
They did. First, unvaccinated people had the highest risk of infection, and that's no real surprise. People with a previous infection reduced their risk of a new infection by about 50%. And people who just had the original 2-shot regimen had a similar risk. The scientists think that's because people had those shots about 8 months earlier, so their immunity waned. The big advantage, however, went to people who had an earlier infection plus 3 shots. That's the original 2 shots plus a booster. That reduced chances of reinfection by about 80%. And that was true for both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
That's a really striking benefit. Did it hold up for severe disease, keeping people out of the hospital and reducing death rates?
It did. Hybrid immunity like this held off serious illness again by about 80%.
Even among people without earlier infections, a booster shot helps.
Yes, it reduces many of your symptoms. And as someone who was recently laid up by COVID for 2 weeks, I can tell you that fewer symptoms is a big deal. The booster data comes from a different study, a 5-month look at about 1,100 healthcare workers, which just appeared in the journal JAMA. Those who got a booster on top of their original 2 shots were less likely to have fever or chills if they got infected with Omicron. They were less likely to need medical attention and could take care of themselves at home. They also missed fewer hours of work. This is all compared with people who didn't get vaccinated at all.
Do the boosters do anything about transmission risk, the chances of passing the infection on to other people?
They do seem to help. They knock down the viral load, how much virus you have in your body, by about a third compared with unvaccinated people. Now, lower viral load doesn't automatically equate to less transmission, the scientists noted in their study, but other studies have made that link. And about 20% of the people with Omicron infections in this study had no symptoms, so they didn't know that they had the virus and were probably hanging around with other people.
So that in itself increases the chance of transmission.
It does. So boosters do help in several ways. And as you said, now's the time to go out and get one.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly. And check out Siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
What is Question 4? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Last July, the Massachusetts legislature overwhelmingly voted for the Work and Family Mobility Act, a law that allows qualified Massachusetts residents to apply for a driver's license regardless of their immigration status. Before driving, the law requires the license applicant to be trained, tested, licensed, and insured. The law will allow immigrants without status to make essential trips to work, to get their kids to school, to medical appointments, and to the grocery store. Similar laws already exist in 17 other states, many of which have experienced measurable improvements in road safety. After all, in case of an accident, it's important that all parties have insurance and proper identification. One reason this law, this public safety measure, is supported by a majority of district attorneys and sheriffs and major city police chiefs. But after the law passed, an opposition group gathered enough signatures to put the issue on the ballot this November. The fourth question on the ballot is, should the law be retained? Please don't be confused by the wording of Question 4. Voting yes will keep the law in place. And remember to turn the ballot to the back. That's where Question 4 is printed. That's where you can vote in favor of both human rights and public safety by voting yes on Question 4. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1990. That was the day that 8 of the 10 unions at the New York Daily News went out on strike. The paper had had one of the highest daily circulations in the United States. The New York Daily News was owned by the Chicago-based Tribune Company. The strike began when management demanded major concessions from the delivery drivers, essentially forcing them out on strike. 7 more unions joined them on the picket line. In retaliation, management brought in scab labor. This caused the 9th union to join the walkout. The newspaper guild workers had planned to honor the picket lines, but not go on strike themselves. But according to an article in the Los Angeles Times, quote, said local guild president Barry Lipton, the editorial employees decided almost immediately at an afternoon meeting to go on strike rather than to work with any imported scabs and goons. Well-known journalist Juan Gonzalez was a strike leader for the local. By using replacement workers, Daily News management was able to keep the paper in production, but they found it much more difficult to get the paper distributed. Even where they could make delivery, many newsstands refused to sell the struck paper. The New York Times blamed this on intimidation from the delivery drivers. But they also acknowledged that some refused distribution either out of sympathy for strikers or an unwillingness to offend pro-union customers. To support the strike, the unions put on a concert headlined by Lou Reed, along with Pete Seeger, Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest, and other musicians. The strike lasted for 5 months, prompting the Tribune to sell the paper. Under new management, the strike was finally settled.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 45 degrees Fahrenheit under fairly heavy, foggy conditions. And then will be partly cloudy this afternoon. Highs are actually going up a tad. They will be around the low 60s today with winds light and variable. Then showers early this evening and cloudy overnight. Lows in the low 40s. Winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And the rain should bring with it something a little less than a quarter inch. So we got that. And then a few showers in the morning, then clouds lingering in the afternoon, highs in the mid-50s, winds light and variable, and something also less than a quarter inch expected for Wednesday's rain. And it does look like we might have a drying out period until the weekend. Ragweed pollen is rated as low as the predominant pollen outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index is in the good range at 29 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.33 inches. Visibility is down to 1.5 miles, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd sources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. London is 63 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 64 and sunny. Rome is 77 and fair. Kyiv is 55 degrees with rain. Kabul is 56 and clear. Hong Kong is 75 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 53 with rain. Sydney, Australia is 66 and clear. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and partly cloudy, and New York, New York is 66 degrees Fahrenheit with foggy conditions. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Yuri Kagayama of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Japan has stepped up its push to catch up on digitization by telling a reluctant public they have to sign up for digital IDs or possibly lose access to their public health insurance. As the naming implies, the initiative is about assigning numbers to people, similar to Social Security numbers in the U.S. Many Japanese worry the information might be misused or that their personal information might be stolen. Some view the My Number effort as a violation of their right to privacy. So, the system that kicked off in 2016 has never fully caught on. Fax machines are still commonplace, and many Japanese conduct much of their business in person with cash. Some bureaucratic procedures can be done online, but many Japanese offices still require inkan, or seals for stamping for identification, and insist on people bringing paper forms to offices. Now, the government is asking people to apply for plastic My Number cards equipped with microchips and photos to be linked to driver's licenses and the public health insurance plans. Health insurance cards now in use, which lack photos, will be discontinued in late 2024. People will be required to use My Number cards instead.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Hundreds of Syrian men and boys were detained, beaten, and forcibly returned to their country by Turkish authorities over a 6-month period, a leading human rights group said yesterday, Monday. The treatment of migrants living in Turkey under temporary protection is a breach of international law, New York-based Human Rights Watch said in a report. The Turkish government has in the past rejected accusations of forcibly returning refugees to Syria. Turkey houses the world's largest refugee population, mostly 3.6 million Syrians who fled the decade-long war in their country. Human Rights Watch said deported Syrians told researchers that Turkish officials arrested them in their homes, workplaces, and on the street. They were then detained in poor conditions, with most suffering beatings and abuse and forced to sign documents agreeing to voluntarily return to Syria. After being driven in handcuffs to the Syrian border, journeys sometimes lasting up to 21 hours, they were forced across the border at gunpoint. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.